Prisoner threat level extremely high.
Finally, a game that lets me roleplay as Gray Fox. To those that picked up 2077 last year, but didn't pick this one up, how does it feel to have chosen the wrong Cyberpunk game? This game is dope and I'm kinda irritated that nobody told me about it. This is exactly the primal rage adrenaline rush that I've been looking for in a game lately. Trying to fill that Doom Eternal void, but without going back to Doom for the 10th time, you know. For those that don't know, Ghostrunner is the 2020 Cyberpunk action game developed by, well, a bunch of studios. Never heard of any of these guys except for 3D Realms, who I can't believe are still making games. So far it's a game that's been well received amongst PC gamers, to the point where not too long ago a sequel was announced. However, for everyone else it's kind of flown under the radar. I know that Metacritic shouldn't be taken that seriously, but what's with the disparity between the PC version and the console version? I guess it doesn't really matter. What's the premise? Well, if you've read, watched, or played any other Cyberpunk media, then the story in this game should sound ultra familiar. So the game takes place in Dharma Tower, a futuristic city that's implied to hold the remainder of humanity. There's a sharp class divide with a select few people holding way too much wealth and power, while everyone else is living in shit. You play as Jack, a Ghostrunner who awakens with no recollection of his past, but is quickly guided by an AI called the Architect. You're tasked to defeat the new ruler of the city, Mara, who was once a partner of the Architect, but enacted a coup which led to the destruction of all the other Ghostrunners and rebel forces. What the hell is a Ghostrunner? Well, they're enhanced katana-wielding super soldiers that used to keep the peace in the city. So imagine a whole bunch of Raidens, except without the strength to chop down a fucking Gundam. Anyway, eventually Jack gets contacted by a rebel leader named Zoe, who he works with to take down Mara and liberate the tower's dissidents, much to the Architect's dismay. We'll get back to all this later. So would you believe me if I told you that this is technically an indie game? Yeah, it doesn't look like it, right? Looks like something that would come out of Ubisoft Montreal or many of the studios under Square Enix. That's the Unreal Engine for you. This game definitely succeeds in achieving the realistic look. It also checks off all the boxes of a cyberpunk aesthetic: obnoxiously tall buildings, neon light signs everywhere, trash-filled alleys, walls covered in graffiti. The only complaint I have is that a lot of these environments do feel very video gamey. I never got the impression that people actually live here. Much of the obstacles just seem to be there for the player to use. You know, all these flat surfaces and sky rails. What are they used for besides for the player to traverse the level? I won't harp on it too much since you actually have to make that sacrifice for linear games like this. Speaking of what's usual, of course this game would have a soundtrack of dark synthwave music. That just seems to be a rite of passage for a lot of modern cyberpunk games. I mean, that type of music does fit the aesthetic, but at the same time, synthwave is not exactly the most diverse genre in terms of sound, so a lot of these games' soundtracks start to blend in with each other. This isn't to say that the music is bad or anything, it's actually pretty good. These tracks tend to lean into the more industrial side of things with more rigid synth melodies and harsh mechanical sounds. It definitely fits the cold isolation of Dharma, but no track in particular stands out to me.
A trespasser spotted in the area. Lockdown lifted.
Alright, before we get into the gameplay, let me turn off this blur because Christ, that shit makes me sick.
Use the surfaces.
Alright, that's better. So this game is pretty much what would happen if you take Shadow Warrior, strip down Lo Wang of all his guns, and give him the time slowing abilities of that guy from Katana Zero. A lot of people said that this is basically a 3D Katana Zero, and yeah, the core gameplay loop is very similar. As Jack, you're often moving from arena to arena killing all the baddies in your way. You're armed with only a katana that can kill anything in one swipe, but the enemies are all armed and can kill you with one shot. Luckily, Jack is quick on his toes, being able to dash, slow down time, wall run, grapple around. You have the advantage of mobility, and the challenge of the game mostly comes down to not getting hit. One shot and hit is all it takes to lose and retry that section over again. And you will retry many of these sections over again because, good God, the reaction of the AI is damn near instant. Not to mention that there's no way you're going to see everything coming. That's mostly due to the first person point of view. Oftentimes you'll die without knowing what the hell killed you. This means retrying levels over and over again until you get that perfect sequence of slashing and dashing through enemies and feeling like the unstoppable murder cyborg that this game wants you to be. Let me tell you, man, when you do reach that state, this game really shines. You feel like a complete badass. However, don't let my gameplay fool you. These perfect attempts barely ever happen. I died a fucking lot, and you will too. Hell, I peeped some speedruns where even they get blindsided by some bullshit. This is very much a trial and error based game that only those that embrace failure will get into. If dying 30 times in a section of a level just to be perfect doesn't sound like a good time, then this game is definitely not for you, dear viewer. However, as someone that likes when games demand more out of the player, I didn't mind too much. It also helps that there's basically no load times, so when I was racking up deaths, I didn't even notice. This game is linear, but there is multiple ways to approach encounters. Hell, even the game suggests that you try different tactics every time you die. This is sorta true, but not really. There is more than one way to approach these encounters, but at the most there's like maybe 3 ways to do things, even more so on hardcore mode with all these fucking lasers. It mostly comes down to certain enemies having specific ways to kill them that kinda breaks the momentum of things. These ninjas where you have to parry them first before they can kill you, whatever the hell these things are where you have to wait for them to start attacking you before you can kill them. Look at this, all up in his grill, but no, the game wants me to kill this guy in the way they want me to. And speaking of parrying, what the hell is up with that mechanic? I'm willing to admit that maybe my timing is just bad, but I swear to God that shit just works when it wants to. It's not even a good habit to get into anyway, since most enemy shots can't even be parried anyway. Luckily, Jack does have more to work with than just his katana, eventually being able to force push and launch Getsukatenchos and shit. My favorite ability is definitely this overload ability that temporarily turns an enemy to your side. I swear there's some sections on hardcore where you can't proceed without using this. I really like using these temporary power-ups such as shurikens and slowing down time for a long period. I just wish they came around a little bit more though. That kind of brings me to one of my main complaints about the core gameplay loop in this game. As good as it feels to get that perfect sequence of slashing and dashing, the second part of that, dashing, really isn't as good as it should be. You gain no fucking distance. That shit is like 2 feet. It's the move you rely on the most aside from your attack, and it's not even that reliable. If the main attack didn't have such a large hitbox, you wouldn't be killing anything in this game. It's the most egregious when you do the sensory boost where, for whatever fucking reason, you lose all momentum. No joke, you could be in mid-lunge, moving in the air, but if you sensory boost, Jack simply just stops. It makes combat encounters more of a pain in the ass than it should be, and it also makes some of these platforming sections a fucking nightmare. Oh, you thought this game was just being this untouchable assassin? Oh, no. In fact, most of this game is just getting to these combat encounters through the platforming, which are easily the jankiest parts of this game. Wall running simply didn't work at times. You can be completely parallel to a wall, and that shit would drop you for no reason like my ex. On hardcore, you do some crazy 180 turnaround jumps using sensory boost, and we already established how unreliable that shit is. I wouldn't be bitching about this stuff if the platforming was just kind of this side thing, but it isn't. There's more platforming than there is combat. Hell, a lot of encounters you have to wall run and jump around everywhere anyway, but you don't gain enough speed unless there's grapple points. Since I'm in complaining mode, I might as well talk about the puzzles and boss battles, which a lot of people point to as being the worst parts of this game. And yeah, I'm in agreement, the puzzles you do in this cyber world are not fun or exciting. They're all based on some logic and admittedly do require some brain power, but it's just not something I want to do in a game like this. Also, for some reason your dash gets taken away for some reason. Pretty glad that you don't have to do these on hardcore. As for the bosses, yeah, they're pretty lame. I don't think they're as bad as some people make them out to be, but yeah, they're not very exciting. The first one is less of a boss and more just a really difficult level. The second one, you're temporarily playing Sekiro, and the third boss is simply waiting for her to exhaust her moves just to get one slash in. The second one in particular kind of bugs me since the parrying time for her moves is completely different from the parrying times of these ninja guys who you fight quite a bit beforehand. It just kind of throws you off for the boss. So eventually Jack does reach Mara and gives her the smackdown, but oops, turns out the AI that's been guiding him the whole time wants complete control over humanity and is now looking to take you out for being too independent. Turns out that was the original purpose of his creation, and of course it rationalizes this by saying that it's for the greater good. Jack gets through a bunch of cybernetic obstacles and eventually reaches the architect to give him a good old stab.
I forbid you, Ghostrunner!
In the epilogue, it's told to us by Zoe that humanity is now free to do what it needs to without the tight control of both Mara and the architect. Jack, I guess, just fucks off somewhere. So, I didn't give a shit about this story at all. It was just kind of there for me. Oh yeah, the AI that's been ultra apathetic on Jack helping humans is actually not good. Who could have seen that coming? It's predictable as hell, but that's not actually the reason I didn't care for this narrative. There's just way too much of a disconnect between the gameplay and the supposed events going on in this world. What do they call it? Ludonarrative dissonance or some shit like that? I usually don't care that much for stuff like this, but Zoe and whatever the hell she had going on barely had anything to do with the moment-to-moment gameplay. You never even meet her in person, so it was impossible for me to give a shit. Not to mention that all the characters are flat as hell, but I guess that's what happens when the two main characters are a goddamn cyborg discovering his identity and an ultra pragmatic AI that hates him having an identity. So yeah, that's Ghostrunner. Did a lot of complaining towards the latter half of the video there, but that's only because there are a lot of issues that I hope that the developers improve upon for the sequel. There's a lot of potential for a great game here. Despite my main issue with some things, I still think that the main gameplay loop of slashing and dashing is worth giving this game a go. A lot of people say that this game is too short and not worth its price point. I agree with the latter point, as I would wait to get this on sale, but I don't agree with the former point, as I think that this game would have started to drag if it was any longer. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. Help this video out in the algorithm by doing the usual stuff, and until next time.